I remember the first time I noticed them. It was a late October evening, the kind where the fog drifts through the suburban streets like smoke from nowhere, and the streetlights flicker as if unsure they want to be on. I had been sitting by my bedroom window, listening to the soft hum of my fridge, the occasional rustle of dry leaves skittering across the asphalt, that calm stillness. It made everything feel suspended, like the world had paused for a moment I wasn't meant to witness. And then I saw it, a shadow, too tall to be a man, stretched across the lawn of the house opposite mine. It didn't move like a person. It slid, folding and bending, as if it belonged to another dimension altogether. For a moment, I thought it was a trick of the fog, the pale light bending in some strange way. But the outline solidified, and it seemed to watch me, its presence pressing against the glass of my window like cold fingers I couldn't see. I held my breath, too afraid to blink, too curious to look away. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying a faint static, a quiet rhythm that felt deliberate, and then it was gone, as though it had never been there, leaving nothing but shadow where the lawn should have been. That night, I learned something I can't unsee, and as I slowly backed away from the window, heart hammering, I realized I never should have opened the door. It was the kind of morning that never really woke up. A pale, half-formed dawn. Fog pressed low over the houses, soft and heavy, like a blanket someone forgot to lift. I remember standing in my room, bare feet on the cold floor, the window glass damp under my hand. The air smelled faintly of wet pavement and the sweet, distant rot of fallen leaves. The streetlights hummed in the stillness, a thin, flickering hum, almost like a breath being held. I looked out because I'd felt something. Not a noise, not movement, just that quiet pull, the strange pressure of being watched. At first, I saw only the fog. It pulled between the houses, shifting in slow curls. It was thick enough that the world felt muffled, wrapped in cotton. Then the shadow moved, a small shift near the base of the streetlight. Barely there, like someone leaning out of sight. I blinked, and the darkness settled again, stretched in across the sidewalk. I told myself it was nothing. Fog plays tricks. Light bends. Shadows wander when you stare too long. But my chest tightened just slightly, like my ribs knew something I didn't. The next night came too quickly. The same fog. The same heavy quiet that lay over the neighborhood like a blanket no one lifted. I kept the window cracked open, just an inch, enough to let in the cold and the faint rustling of leaves, enough to hear the low hum of the streetlight vibrating in the stillness. I didn't expect anything to happen. I wanted to believe nothing would. But the shadow was closer this time, a little to the right, near the edge of my yard. Slow, intentional. It didn't sway like a tree. It didn't float like fog. It waited. I felt my breath slow, my heartbeat soften, like my body was trying to disappear into the silence. Every night after that, it grew braver. Not by much, just a few inches closer than the night before. A careful progression that felt almost polite in its patience. I tried to rationalize it. Tried to tell myself it was a trick of the light, or some tall shape left behind by the neighbor's garbage cans, or maybe a misplaced branch bending forward in the wind. But there was no wind. Every night was still, unmoving, the kind of stillness that felt intentional. By the fourth night, I'd begun waking before dawn without an alarm, like something whispered me awake. The room always felt too quiet. No cars, no dogs, no distant traffic hum. Just that soft static of fog touching the window pane, and the feeling that the world outside had paused. I pushed back the curtain with 2 fingers. The fabric felt cold, almost damp. The glass fog instantly under my breath. The shadow stood near the fence, closer than ever, just beyond the pale spill of the porch light. Too tall to be a person, too still to be anything natural. Its edges were wrong, straight in some places, blurred in others, like someone had torn out of the darkness and pasted it against the fog. My throat tightened. I didn't move, didn't blink. Something in the air shifted, the faint rustling, a soft scrape against the damp grass. The shadow leaned, not forward, not quite toward me, but enough that the fog behind it curled differently, as if pushed aside. I stepped back from the window, only an inch, But the cold on my skin eased, like I had broken some invisible tether. The next night, I didn't want to look. I wanted to shut the curtains before the sun even set. I wanted to sleep with the lights on. But the quiet outside kept tugging at me, a silence too heavy to ignore. Around 2 in the morning, I felt a shift in the air, a slow pressure in the room, as though something outside had leaned its weight against the house. I turned toward the window. My heartbeat cushioned in my ears, soft and slow. The fog was thicker than before. It clung to the glass, pressing cool against the curtains. I couldn't see the streetlight, couldn't see the yard, only the faintest glow of pale light trying to bleed through the fog. I reached out and touched the curtain. The fabric trembled under my fingers, as if someone had brushed the other side. I froze. Something shifted behind the cloth. Not fast, not violent, just a soft slide, the suggestion of movement, like a fingertip trailing lightly across fabric. My breath caught. The room felt smaller, the air tighter. I could hear the faintest rasp, like fog dragging along skin. I didn't pull the curtain back. I couldn't. The rustling stopped. The pressure faded. But the cold stayed, a thin line of chill running across the back of my neck. I stepped away slowly, each movement careful, quiet, as though the floorboards might betray me. The curtain settled against the window again. Still, perfectly still, but I could feel it just on the other side. Something waiting in the pale glow of the fog. Silent, patient, close enough now that the dark behind the fabric felt alive. I stood there in the half-dark, barely breathing. The house around me seemed to hold its breath too, and in the hush and the cold, I heard a single soft shift right behind curtains. The night felt colder than it should have. Late autumn, dry leaves stuck to the pavement, their edges soft and curled from the damp. I walked home alone after my shift, hands in my pockets, breath rising in pale clouds that drifted into the fog. The street was quiet, too quiet for that hour. Even the distant hum of traffic felt muffled, trapped somewhere behind the thick white air. The streetlights blinked above me, not a normal flicker. They stuttered in a slow rhythm, on, off, on, like they were breathing. I tried matching my steps to the pulses of light, but they never lined up. They always shifted, a half-second behind or ahead, like they were watching my pace and adjusting on purpose. I kept walking, the sidewalk rough under my shoes, the fog brushing cool against my cheeks. Each breath tasted faintly metallic. The next flicker came, and something moved across the path. Not a person, not an animal, just a blur, all shadow, no shape, darting just ahead of me, disappearing into fog like it had never touched the ground at all. I stopped. The air around me held perfectly still. Leaves rested in piles at the edges of the pavement, until one rustled softly, though nothing touched it. A prickle crawled up my spine. I listened. The world felt hollow, like sound rolled through a long hallway before reaching me. The faint static in the distance buzzed through the fog, as if the streetlights were whispering to each other. I swallowed and kept moving. Slow steps. Hands colder now despite being buried deep in my pockets. The streetlights flickered again, 3 sharp blinks. And in each blink, I saw something different. A shadow to my left. Gone. A figure leaning forward. Gone. Something reaching from the fog. Gone. The light steadied, but my breath didn't. I felt watched. The kind of watching that sits low in your chest, like an invisible hand pressing lightly against your ribs. Another rustle swept across the sidewalk. Dry leaves skittered over the ground in a slow circle, as if turning to face me. I walked faster, the fog thickened around my ankles, curling up my legs in soft swirls. The cold touched my skin like damp fingertips. The static grew louder, a faint buzzing that came and went with each flicker of the lights. I passed the empty lot near the old houses. Most people avoided it. The grass overgrown, the fence sagging, boards nailed crooked over the windows of the abandoned place at the end. Tonight, the fog sat heavy around it, like it wanted to hide something. I noticed movement again, a quick shift to my right, something low and fast, slipping behind a cluster of dead bushes. I stopped breathing for a moment. My ears caught the faint scrape of gravel, the soft echo of a footstep that wasn't mine. The lights blinked. Longer this time. Everything went dark. Just a breath. Barely a second. But in that second, that thin slice of darkness, I felt something pass in front of me. The cold brushed my chest. A shadow grazed the corner of my eye. A faint smell of earth and damp cloth drifted by. When the lights came back on, nothing was there. Only the fog, curling, folding it on itself like it was thinking. I walked again. Slower now. Every step placed carefully, as if the ground might shift under me. The static came in pulses. Short bursts, soft crackles that followed me down the street, bouncing off the houses, sliding through the air like invisible insects. My shoulders tightened. My throat felt dry. I reached a narrow stretch of sidewalk where the streetlights stood the closest together, forming a pale hallway of flickering beams. I stepped into it. The hum and the lamps vibrated against my skin. The light blinked in uneven patterns that made the fog twist like it was alive. Something darted across again, closer this time, close enough that the air moved against my sleeve. I stopped. My breath faltered. My pulse thudded softly in my ears. The fog parted just a little, like something had walked through it. I could feel it watching from somewhere I couldn't see. The static faded. The rustling leaves went still. A silence settled over everything. A deep, heavy quiet that thickened the air. My footsteps sounded too loud, too sharp, like they were echoing in a place much larger than the street I stood on. I turned toward the old house without meaning to. Its doorway was swallowed in darkness. The boards over the windows were stained with age, edges warped. For a moment, the fog shifted around the front steps. A slow curl, the soft drift, revealing something darker behind it. A shadow, tall, unmoving, standing perfectly centered in the doorway. Its shape was wrong, too straight, too still, as if carved out of the dark. The streetlight above me flickered twice. Each blink stretched the shadow taller, sharper, deeper into the doorframe. I couldn't look away. The air tightened around me, holding me in place. One last flicker, a long one. When the light returned, the shadow didn't move. It only seemed to lean, just slightly, waiting in the silence. I stood there in the cold fog, unable to breathe, unable to step forward or back. And the shadow in the doorway watched me, as the street fell quiet again and the pale hallway of flickering lights slowly dimmed around us. The house felt colder than usual that night. Late winter, the kind of cold that hangs in the air even with the heat turned on, thin, sharp, crawling across the floorboards like a quiet draft. I walked down the hallway, half asleep. Lights dim, only a pale glow from the small lamp at the far end, humming lightly as dust drifted around it. My footsteps were soft against the wooden floor. The boards felt cool under my heels, smooth and a little damp from the constant fog pressing against the windows. That fog had been thicker lately, heavier, as if it wanted something. The hallway mirror caught the lamplight, a long rectangle of glass hanging between two doors. I passed it every night without thinking, but something pulled my gaze toward it this time. A quiet tug, a shift somewhere in the edge of my vision. I slowed. My breath floated in front of me, faint and white. The mirror felt too bright, too awake. I stepped closer. The reflection stared back at me, soft and dim, matching my movements like it always did. At first. Then it didn't. When I lifted my hand, the reflection lifted its hand too. But a moment late, barely a delay, a fraction of a blink, but enough that my stomach tightened. The glass felt colder now, even though I wasn't touching it. It radiated a thin chill that brushed my arms like static. I thought maybe I was tired. Maybe my eyes were slow, tracking reflection out of sync. But I blinked long and slow, and the silhouette inside the glass didn't blink with me. It stayed still, head tilted, body tall, and stretched by the angle of the dim hallway light. A faint hum ran through the lamp overhead. The reflection twitched. Barely. A small jerk, like it had been waiting for the vibration. My throat tightened. I stepped back once. The reflection stepped back a breath late. A softer, slower movement, as if it were underwater. The silence in the hallway thickened. It filled my ears heavy and slow, leaving only the faint rustling of fog outside the window near the kitchen. I tore my gaze away for a second, just long enough to let my breath ease. But when I looked back, the reflection was closer. Not much, just inches, its face near the glass, tilted in a way my head wasn't. The dim light shimmered around it. For a moment, it felt like the mirror wasn't a mirror anymore, more like a window into a place with no sound, no warmth, no breath. I stepped forward again slowly, careful not to make the floor groan under my weight. My reflection moved too, that same slight delay, but the shape of its shoulders seemed different now, sharper, more defined than mine. I leaned closer, studying the dark outline. The glass gave off a faint cool smell, old metal, cold dust. Fog pressed against the window near the hall's end, making the light flicker. The fog curled upward as if climbing, pressing its weight against the glass like a hand trying to push inside. The lamp buzzed in a low tremble. The reflection twitched again, its head tilted more. Mine stayed still. My breath caught in my throat. I raised my hand slowly, feeling the cold air slide across my skin. The reflection raised its hand too, not delayed this time. Perfectly matched, but its fingers seemed longer, thinner, curved in a way mine didn't. I stared at the glass, my heartbeat quiet, buried in the silence. My reflection stared back with dark, hollow eyes that didn't belong to me. Eyes that looked deeper than the hallway, deeper than the house, like they were staring from some empty space far behind the mirror's surface. I whispered a small breath. Warm air wavered across the glass. The reflection didn't exhale. Its chest stayed still. A faint static crawled along the hallway walls. The lamp hummed harder. The fog outside beat lightly against the window. Tap, 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 like fingertips brushing the glass. My skin prickled. I blinked again. Once. Slow. And the reflection didn't blink at all. It only leaned closer, its face inches from the surface, edges blurring into the dim light. The cold from the mirror reached me, sharp, thin, sliding over my skin like a whisper. My breath trembled. The hallway thickened with silence. Even the rustling outside had gone quiet. I held still, every muscle tight, but unmoving. The reflection stared. Its lips softened. Then, slowly a grin spread across its face. Wide, crooked, a smile I wasn't making. My own face stayed frozen, breath shaking in my chest. The reflection smile widened, stretching too far, too slow as though it enjoyed being seen. The fog outside pressed harder against the window. The cold deepened around me, and in the pale, trembling light of the hallway, I watched the reflection grin again, even as I stood perfectly still with my mouth closed and my heart sinking into the silence. The night felt stretched thin, early spring, but the cold still clung to the pavement. Fog drifted low across the street, brushing against my ankles like something alive. I walked alone, hands buried in my jacket pockets. The air smelled like damp concrete and old rain, the kind that settles deep into the cracks of the road. The streetlights glowed in a pale row ahead of me, soft gold halos floating in the mist. But the darkness between them looked deeper than usual, heavier, like something was pressed inside the spaces of light couldn't reach. My footsteps echoed along the quiet road, a slow rhythm, a soft tap on the cold walkway with each step. Then another tap followed, not behind me, not ahead, perfectly timed with mine. My chest tightened. I paused, letting the cold rise up around me. The echo stopped too, instantly. No delay, no drift, just silence. I took a breath, cool, sharp, carrying the faint smell of wet leaves. I stepped again. The shadow between the next pair of streetlights shifted, not by much, just a slow stretch across the ground, elongating like something waking up. I blinked hard. Fog curled around the edges of the shadow, swallowing it, giving it shape. My pace quickened without meaning to. The footsteps matched me, soft, steady, too perfectly aligned with each movement. The wires overhead vibrated in the still air, humming with static, a low tremor that crawled across my skin. Somewhere in that hum, something whispered, not in a voice I knew, not in a language my mind recognized. Just a thin, distant trail of sound drifting along the wires like cold breath. I tried to ignore it, tried to keep walking, but the darkness between the next two streetlights seemed to pulse. The shadow there stretched again, longer this time, reaching across the ground like an arm. Fog swirled over it, twisting, pulling away, revealing the faint outline of something tall standing completely still. I froze. The air went thin in my lungs. The figure didn't move. It wasn't shaped like any person I'd seen. Angles too sharp, edges too soft, as if it were carved from the dark itself. My breath trembled in the cold. The footsteps around me slowed, matched my stillness. The hum from the wires deepened, rattling gently, whispering once more. I stepped forward, just one slow step, the sole of my shoe scraping the pavement. The figure's shadow twitched, barely noticeable, a small shift that made the fog ripple around it. I didn't want to get closer, but the path home was straight, only one direction, right through the space where the figure waited. I swallowed the tight ache in my throat and forced myself forward. The fog wrapped around me as I walked. Cool, wet, sliding up my arms and around my face like fingers brushing my skin. The streetlights buzzed overhead. Each one flickered as I passed beneath it. When I reached the gap, the dark stretch between the lamps, the shadow didn't dissolve. It held its shape, tall, still, watching without eyes. I took another step. My breath felt shallow, shaky. The footsteps beside mine returned, soft, almost delicate, like someone invisible was testing the ground with me. I kept my eyes ahead. The pale halo of the next streetlight glowed through the fog, promising a little safety. As I passed the figure, I felt the air change. Heavy, dense, cold enough to raise the hairs on my arms. The figure didn't move, didn't turn, didn't reach for me. It just froze, as if the light behind me pinned it in place. The wires above us hummed louder. The static crackled softly, carrying a whisper that brushed the back of my neck. I exhaled, the breath shaking out of me. I stepped in the glow of the next streetlight, letting its warmth settle against my cold skin. I turned just slightly, not a full look, just enough to catch the edge of the darkness behind me. The shadow was gone. No shape, no outline, nothing but a puddle of fog resting on the ground, swirling slowly as if something had sunk into it. The footsteps stopped. The static faded. Only the faint rustling of fog against the pavement remained. I stood there for a long moment, alone under the pale light, breath rising in thin white clouds. The next stretch of darkness waited ahead, quiet, deep, empty. But now I knew better. Things lived in those spaces. Things that walked when I walked. Things that watched from the edges of the fog. I wiped my palms on my jacket and stepped forward, slow and careful, into the next pool of dim light. And behind me, the fog curled as if something invisible had just slipped back into it. The night felt heavier than usual. Early summer. Warm air drifting low across the yards, thick with the smell of damp soil and cut grass. Even so, a thin chill clung to my skin as I stepped outside. Fog pooled along the ground like a quiet tide. It curled around my ankles, soft and cold, brushing against the warmth of the night. I wasn't planning to walk far, just a short breath of fresh air. But halfway down my driveway, something pulled at me, a faint hum rising from the direction of my neighbor's old porch. It wasn't a tune, not quite a voice, just a thin vibration in the air, soft, steady, drifting toward me like it had weight. I paused. The humidity pressed close around my chest, warm at first, then tightening with something colder beneath. The abandoned house sat at the end of the cul-de-sac, porch lights long dead, wooden boards gray with age, weeds crowding the steps like they were trying to climb them. The hum came again, low, barely there, but enough to draw me closer. I took a slow step toward the house. The fog swirled around my shoes, carrying the faint smell of wet leaves. The shadows on the porch shifted, small movements, quick, almost playful. But every time I lifted my eyes to catch them, they stilled, melting into the dark corners between the wooden beams. My breath trembled. I moved a little closer, feeling the soft crunch of gravel under my foot, the night air brushing cool against the back of my neck. The hum deepened, It vibrated gently in my chest, syncing with my heartbeat. Each pulse felt heavier, like something unseen was pressing its hand against me, pushing me forward, holding me there. The porch loomed ahead, boards warped, paint peeling, fog weaving between the slats like thin fingers. I lifted one foot onto the first step. The wood felt cool through my shoe. The hum rose from beneath it, faint but certain. The shadows in the corners darted again, quick streaks of darkness, sliding just out of sight. I caught one in the edge of my vision, a small, curled shape, but when I turned my head, nothing was there. My chest tightened again, a thin, invisible weight pressed against my ribs. Not painful, just firm, like someone leaning lightly into me. I whispered a small breath, trying to steady myself. The air tasted metallic, cold despite the warm night. The hum shifted. It wavered, softened, and then, between the small, trembling beats of vibration, I heard my name. Not loud, not clear, just a soft exhale carried through the hum, brushing my ear like a cold breath. I froze. The weight on my chest grew heavier for a moment before easing again. The shadows at the far end of the porch quivered. They slid along the wooden boards like something crawling low to the ground. I took another careful step. The fog curled under the porch, folding into itself. The smell of damp wood rose up, old, rotting, sweet in a way that made the back of my throat tighten. My heartbeat softened, slow, uneven. The hum guided me closer to the boards near the railing. The dark beneath the porch seemed deeper tonight, the kind of dark that didn't reflect any light at all. Shadows twitched again. This time I didn't look away. Something small moved between the slats. A dark shape no bigger than a child's silhouette. Round shoulders. Long fingers pressed flat against the underside of the wood. It slipped its head forward slowly. Just enough for the shape to take form, not enough for me to see a face. I didn't breathe. Couldn't. The hum rose once more. Stronger now, pushing lightly against my ribs, coiling through the air in a slow spiral. The small figure tilted its head, like it was listening to the same vibration. Then, with a quick, smooth motion, it slid back. Its thin shape melted into the darkness beneath the porch, vanishing like a shadow dissolving in water. The fog rippled. A soft rustling lifted the edges of the porch boards. Silence followed, deep, heavy, pressed tight around me. I stood there, not moving, staring at the spot where the figure had disappeared. The hum faded into the night, leaving only the faint, warm breath of summer air drifting across my skin. The weight on my chest eased slowly, like an unseen hand letting go. Fog curled around my ankles one last time before thinning into the night. I stepped back off the porch. My footsteps were soft, unsteady. The abandoned house behind me fell still again. Shadows tucked into corners, silence, settling into the old wood as if nothing had ever moved at all. But as I reached the edge of my yard, a faint vibration brushed the back of my ear, a soft low alive, slipping back beneath the porch boards. Late autumn crept around the house that night, cold air pressing against the windows, leaves scratching lightly along the walls outside, soft, uneven, almost shy. Inside, everything felt still, quiet, warm enough, but with a thin chill leaking from the ceiling, like the house was breathing cold to the floorboards above me. I was sitting alone in my room when I heard it, a faint rustling drifting down from the attic, slow at first, then stopping, then starting again with a soft scrape that seemed to move across the beams. I held my breath. The silence afterward felt too heavy, too aware. The attic was old, dusty, a place I avoided unless I needed something forgotten. But tonight, something was moving up there. I reached for the pull string in the hallway. My fingers brushed against it, dry, cold, rough with age. When I tugged it, the attic door fell open with a sigh of stale air. A ladder unfolded toward me. The wood felt cool under my palm, coated with a thin layer of dust. The smell of old insulation drifted down, thick and fibrous. The rustling returned, a quick, soft shuffle, like something rearranging itself in the dark. I climbed the ladder slowly. Each step creaked under my weight, stretching the silence, making it feel too thin. Pale light pooled at the edge of the opening. The weak glow from the single bulb hanging in the attic. It flickered as I pushed myself upward. The air hit me first. Cold, still, almost heavy enough to cling to my skin. I exhaled softly, watching a faint cloud form in front of me. My breath hung in the air longer than it should have. The attic was the same as always. Boxes pushed against the walls, old furniture covered in sheets, dust sitting thick on every surface. But somehow it felt smaller tonight, like the walls leaned in a little closer. I stepped forward. The floorboards groaned beneath me, sending a ripple through the stillness. Another rustle drifted across the attic, this time behind a stack of old picture frames. It wasn't loud, just enough to pull me deeper into the pale light. Shapes moved in the corner. Not fast, not slow, just wrong. I couldn't see them clearly at first, just dark outlines bending at angles that didn't match the boxes around them, like silhouettes stretched too thin, like shadows that lost their anchor. The bulb flickered again. Its pale glow trembled across the attic beams. The shadows bent with it, bending further, leaning, tilting as if following the shaking light. My breath thinned. My fingers tingled with cold. The air felt tighter around me, like the attic was shrinking with each quiet second. I took another step. Dust rose from the floor, drifting up in slow spirals. They brushed against my face, dry, weightless, cold. The rustling grew sharper. Closer. It came from the far side of the room now. Near a trunk I hadn't opened in years. I moved toward it, feeling the floor vibrate faintly beneath my feet. A thin static settled in my ears. The attic bulb buzzed above me, its pale circle of light dimming with every flicker. The shapes twisted again. Elongated arms stretching along the wall, shoulders folding inward, heads bending too far to one side. But the moment I stepped close enough to see, the shapes dissolved, snapping back into the dull outlines of old chairs and boxes, like they had never been anything else. The silence that followed felt deeper, heavier, pulling at the corners of the attic. I stood still, listening, waiting. Then the rustling stopped. All at once, the cold deepened. A thin wave of stillness swept through the attic, brushing harshly against my neck. I turned toward the trunk, the pale light shaking above me. There, on the floor near my feet, a shadow stretched outward, thin, longer than any object around me should cast. It reached in a slow, creeping line across the boards. Its edges trembled softly, like it was breathing. I stepped back. The shadow followed. Not fast, just steady, pulling itself toward me inch by inch. My chest tightened. A cold pressure settled around my ribs. My breath hitched in my throat. The bulb flickered once more. The attic dipped into half-darkness. The shadow stretched further, its long, thin arm reaching toward the toes of my shoe. I took another step back. The cold thickened. My breath felt sharp and metallic. The shadow hesitated. Then, like mist curling away from a warm surface, it then pulled back and slid beneath the nearest box until it vanished completely. The attic fell silent, empty. Still, the cold air loosened around me. The bulb steadied, casting its pale, trembling light across the quiet beams. I didn't move for a long moment. The dust settled around me again, soft, slow, like nothing had stirred at all. When I finally stepped back toward the ladder, the attic felt wider again. But the cold stayed with me, clinging to my skin, trailing behind me as if waiting. I climbed down quietly, each soft footstep echoing faintly through the empty space above. The attic door closed with a low creak. The rustling didn't return, but the stillness did, following me down the hall, settling into the corners of the house, like something watching through the pale light, waiting for the next time I listened too closely to the quiet above my ceiling. It was late winter. A thin layer of frost clung to the pavement, shimmering under the pale glow of the streetlights. I stood alone at the corner of my neighborhood, hands in my pockets, breath drifting in small clouds that faded as fast as they formed. The cold air pressed against my skin, clean, sharp, quiet. The streetlight above me flickered. A soft hum pulsed through the metal pole, vibrating faintly against the frozen air. Each flicker sent a wave of pale light across the empty road, stretching long shadows from trees, pulling them in and out like they were breathing. I watched the branches sway gently, dark shapes brushing against one another with dry rustling as the wind slid through them. But the shadows on the ground didn't move with the wind. They shifted with the light, and only with the light. The next pulse came slowly, a weak flash, a tremble of brightness. The shadows stretched, longer, thinner, dragged across the road in crooked lines. I felt the cold crawl higher up my spine. A small gust of air swept past me, carrying the smell of damp leaves and the faint metallic taste of winter. The street light flickered again, a quick, stuttering pulse. The shadows twitched. Some bent sharply, as though reacting to something I couldn't see. Others leaned toward the center of the road, their thin ends reaching out as though searching for something. I held still. Every rustle from the trees around me felt louder now, closer, more alive. My breath slowed. My heartbeat pressed softly against my ribs, like it didn't want to be heard. Another flicker, this one longer. The pale light blinked, stretched, then snapped back. The shadows danced with it, rising slightly from the pavement, their edges lifting in small jagged lines as though caught in a silent static current. I swallowed hard. The cold air scraped a little at my throat. The street was empty, yet I felt surrounded, as though the quiet had eyes, as though the darkness between the houses leaned forward to listen. The shadows pulled closer with the next pulse. Slow, measured, unnatural. My breath fog in front of me. It felt heavier now, lingering in the air as though afraid to drift away. Above me, the streetlight hummed, a soft vibration that made the frost on the metal pole tremble. The light dimmed again. A thin line of brightness circled the bulb, holding on the edge of fading. Then it blinked back, and the shadows beneath it jerked, stretching in unison. Some bent toward me, others twisted along the sidewalk. Their movements matched perfectly with the trembling pulses of light. I stepped back once. Just a small, careful shift. The shadows followed. Not quickly, but with a slow, deliberate slide that made the thin frost crunch under my shoes. The silence around me deepened. Even the wind felt hesitant now, barely brushing the nearby branches. The next flicker came without warning. Bright, sharp, cold. The shadows snapped tall, leaning, tilting, arching over one another like thin figures rising from the ground. My chest tightened. The air felt too dense to pull in. I blinked, and the shadows twitched with the same rhythm, a half-second delay like they were watching me through the pale light's pulse. The street light flickered again, a fast stutter this time. The shadows jerked sharply, their forms distorted further, edges pulling like stretched fabric. Some split, branching off into thin strands that crawled across the pavement. I took another step back. My breath trembled as it left me. I could feel the cold on my teeth. The light dimmed once more, lower than before, barely holding on. The shadows seemed to freeze mid-shift, bent crooked, waiting. The hum from the pole deepened, a soft vibration that rolled through the frost beneath my feet. I felt it in my legs, a quiet pulse echoing to the still air. I looked around the empty road. No cars, no people, just me, the cold, and the shadows that refused to stay still. My breath thinned. The silence tightened around me like a hell breath. The streetlight flickered for a final time, a long, slow pulse that stretched the shadows into impossible shapes, bending them toward one another, toward me, toward the center of the frozen road. Then the light went out. Everything dropped into darkness, complete, thick, silent. I could still feel the shadows around me, pressed close in that breathless dark, listening with the same patience as the cold night air. The night felt colder than usual. Late autumn, the kind where the air tastes faintly of wet leaves and something distant, something metallic. I stepped into my backyard, pulling the door shut behind me with a soft click. The wooden boards under my feet were cool, holding the night's dampness like a quiet breath. Fog drifted in from the far end of the yard, slow, thick, rolling between the trees like it carried weight. The porch light behind me cast a pale glow, but it barely touched the fog. The mist swallowed the edges of the yard as though the world ended just a few feet ahead. I could smell the wet earth, that deep, heavy scent after a cold evening. It clung to the back of my throat. It made each breath slow. The fog crept closer, curling around my ankles, brushing against my legs with a cold softness that felt too gentle, too intentional. Shapes flickered inside the gray, thin shadows drifting between the trees. Not walking, not running, just drifting. Each movement was blurred, a soft smear of darkness slipping across pale mist. I tried to focus, but the fog made everything ripple like a thin sheet of glass about to crack. My heart beat slower, too slow, as if the thick air was pressing down on my ribs, telling them to move more gently. The world felt quieter, like every sound was being pulled a few seconds behind me. Even my own footsteps felt delayed, a faint echo in the grass that didn't match the timing of my steps. Time felt stretched, thin, hushed. The fog rolled forward again, spreading across the yard in a long, pale wave. It reached the old tree at the center, climbing the trunk like a silent tide. More shapes appeared, flickering, fading, reforming. Shadow people, if that's what they were. Tall silhouettes drifting in slow circles, almost dancing in the thickened air. Their movements didn't match the wind, didn't match the stillness either. They moved with the fog, as though the mist carried them the way water carries leaves. I felt alone out there, but not the comfortable kind of alone. A different kind, a heavy kind. The porch behind me seemed farther away than it should have been, too far from the number of steps I'd taken. I took in another breath. The cold stung inside my nose, deep enough to make me blink. One of the shapes drifted closer. Just a slight shift. A dark form stretching long, and then folding in on itself as the fog thickened around it. I blinked and it flickered out. Gone. But something in the air felt disturbed. Like whatever it was hadn't left. Just changed places. The fog curved around my knees now, almost tugging on my jeans, as though trying to draw me deeper into the yard. The silence pressed closer. A quiet hum, not loud, not clear, vibrated somewhere above the trees. A soft trembling nestled in the fog. Another shadow flickered. Closer. Then another. Thin silhouettes gliding in the distance, their edges bending like they weren't attached to anything solid. The trees rustled softly, leaves shifting under the weight of the fog, even though the air was still. I felt watched, not by eyes, by presence, by the fog itself holding its breath around me in a strange, patient way. Time slowed even more. My heartbeat felt thick, each one spaced apart, as though the night was deciding when the next should come. I took a step backward, slow, careful. The grass beneath my heel felt cold and damp, wet enough to seep through the fabric. The fog rose with the movement, lifting in a thin wave like it sensed a shift. I could barely see the porch now, just a faint, warm shape buried behind the growing haze. The shadows drifted again, their movements quicker now, less dreamy, more aware. I rubbed my arms, tried to shake off the cold that felt deeper than the weather. One silhouette paused between two trees. A tall, narrow shape. Still, too still. The fog curled around its legs. But the shadow didn't blend with it the way the others had. It held its shape, held its place, watching me from across the yard. My breath caught. The air felt thick enough to touch, to hold. I stepped back again. My foot brushed a fallen branch, and the soft crack of it breaking echoed too long in the fog, as if the sound got lost, then found its way back. I froze. The shadows shifted. A thin movement, like a person leaning forward in a quiet, curious way. The fog rose higher. It swallowed the lower half of the yard, then the center, then crept toward where I stood. The cold pressed against my chest. A slow, heavy weight. I turned slightly, reaching for the porch steps that I could barely see. And then, from somewhere in the fog, something moved. Fast. Too close. A sharp flicker of darkness breaking toward me before the mist closed in again and everything went still. It was close to midnight. Late autumn. The kind of cold that settles into the walls and lingers in every breath. I sat alone in the living room. Only a small lamp was on, a pale, tired glow pooling across the floor. Everything else felt still. Heavy. Waiting. I wasn't really watching anything. The television had been on earlier, running some old show, but the channel faded into darkness when I muted it. Just a blank screen. Just a quiet room, but the quiet didn't last. A faint hum slipped through the air. Low, uneven like something waking up. My skin prickled as the television flickered. A thin band of light trembled across the glass. Then the static rolled in. White grain, harsh and soft at the same time, like 1,000 tiny voices breathing against the surface. I leaned forward, confused. The remote sat untouched on the table. The power light glowed a weak red, meaning it shouldn't even be on. But the screen hissed, and the room felt smaller. The pale static light spilled across the rug. It moved over my hands, cold against my skin, almost damp. I heard something beneath the static. Not loud, not sharp, but crawling. Thin whispers sliding between the noise. Barely a breath. My name, soft, drawn out, a quiet tremble hidden under crackling. I froze. My chest tightened. The room tilted in a slow, uneasy way, like the air had thickened around me. The whispers pushed through again. My name, closer this time, spoken in a voice that felt too familiar. I swallowed hard, afraid to reach for the remote, afraid to move at all. The static pulsed, brighter for a moment, then dimmed like something behind it was shifting. The shadows in the room stretched. The corners darkened, pulling away from the lamp's weak glow. I watched one shadow near the bookshelf slowly drag across the floor, thin, long, reaching toward a television as though drawn by the light. Another shadow tilted near the doorway, bending in a way no shape should. They weren't still. They weren't harmless. I rubbed my arms, feeling a cold layer settle on my skin. The whispers kept crawling through the static, brushing against my ears, hardly louder than breathing. My name, again, but now it carried a small echo, as if spoken from inside the walls. I turned my head slightly. The room behind me was dark. The air there felt thick, unmoving, almost pressed against my back. The static changed. It deepened. A slow rumble mixed in, like distant thunder held underwater. White grain twisted across the screen. The pattern sharpened, jittering, forming faint lines. They bent, curled, adjusting themselves like a shape, struggling to hold together. I felt the hair on my arms rise. The whispers grew steadier. They didn't sound like words anymore, more like someone trying to speak through a mouth full of ice. My breath fogged slightly in the cold air. I hadn't noticed the temperature dropping until then. It felt like the warmth had been sucked out of the room. The shadows stretched farther. One touched the edge of my shoe. Just a soft brush, but enough to make my leg jerk back. I didn't look away from the television. I couldn't. The static lines narrowed, gathered, pulled inward, as if drawn by invisible threads. Something inside the noise was taking shape. A head, or the outline of one, then shoulders. A slow, flickering rise of a form trying to stand inside the screen. The whispers stopped, all at once, cut off, leaving a silence so heavy I could feel it pressing against my chest. The static grew dimmer, yet sharper around the edges of the shape. Its outline solidified, not clean, not human, but close enough to make my throat tighten. The shadows in the room leaned toward it, drawn like they recognized it, like they were waiting for it. I felt a soft rustling behind me, but when I turned, nothing moved, only the cold, only the dark. My heart thudded against my ribs, slow and uneven. Each breath tasted like dust and metal. The figure inside the static turned. If you could call that twitch a turn, its faceless head angling in my direction. I felt it notice me. A quiet pull, like being watched from a doorway you can't see. The screen darkened around its form. The pale light tightened until it framed the silhouette perfectly. For a moment, everything was still. No whispers, no movement. Just me, the cold room, and the shape inside the static. The shadows held their breath. The television hummed a thin, final note. And then the silhouette leaned forward, not stepping out, not reaching, just shifting enough for the edges to sharpen in the dark. Close enough that I could feel its attention settle over me. Close enough that the room felt smaller than before. The static flickered once, then held, and the figure remained. It was late evening when I noticed it. Early winter. Cold air resting heavy on the back porch. thick enough that each breath felt slow and quiet. The woods behind my house were darker than usual. No moon, no wind, just a stillness that clung to the branches like it didn't want to let go. I stepped outside with a small shiver, pulling my sweater tighter. My yard felt smaller in the cold. The trees felt closer. Everything wrapped in a thin drift of fog that hovered just above the ground. That's when I saw the glow. A faint, pale light deep between the trees. Not bright, not sharp, just a soft pulse, like something breathing behind the trunks. I blinked, unsure if it was real. The glow moved, only slightly, like it shifted its weight. Fog curled around it, hiding the edges, swallowing the shape. My skin tightened, a slow prickling across my shoulders. The air around me held a low hum, so soft I almost thought it came from inside my own chest. I stepped forward, just 1 foot on the cold grass. The fog brushed against my ankles, cool and damp, pulling at me like it wanted me to stop. But I couldn't look away from the light. As I got closer, the glow brightened for a breath, then dimmed, pale white, tinted with something cold. Something that didn't feel like it belonged in the woods. I squinted through the fog, and there, moving in the glow, were shapes. Tall, still, barely outlined by the light, behind them, like shadows carved into the fog. They didn't walk. They didn't sway. They simply observed, quiet and patient. A lump formed in my throat. I took another step, then another. The leaves beneath my shoes crackled, soft but clear in the quiet. Every time I lifted my foot, the fog grew thicker, as if each step stirred more of it from the ground. Soon it rose higher, brushing against my knees, then my waist. My breath came out shaky. I tried to swallow, but the cold air clung to my tongue, tasting like metal and pine. The pale glow flickered. The shapes inside it tilted slightly, as though following my movement, watching me move closer. Waiting, I reached the tree line. The bark felt wet under my fingertips, slick with dew and fog. For a moment, I thought about turning back, but the glow pulsed again, quiet, steady, calling without a sound. I stepped into the trees. The fog swallowed my legs completely. Thick as wool, the rustling leaves above me whispered a soft warning, but the glow held my eyes. I walked deeper. Each step felt slower, heavier, like the ground wanted me to stay where I was. The shapes in the light grew clearer. They had no faces, no features, only outlines that shifted gently, like they were made of mist and shadow. The glow stretched across the trunks, painting everything with a pale, ghost-like wash. I felt it on my skin, cold but comforting in a strange way, like the woods had fallen into a dream. I tried to call out, maybe just to hear something human, but my voice caught in my throat. Nothing came out, only silence, thick, echoing in my ears. I took another step. The fog climbed higher, up to my shoulders now. It pressed against me, cool and damp, slowing everything, even my breathing. The shapes moved again. A faint shift, a quiet lean toward me. My heart thudded once, deep and uneven. The pale glow dimmed, then flared as if reacting to my fear. I reached out a hand toward them. I don't know why. Maybe to see if they were real, maybe to prove something to myself. But before my fingers touched the edge of the light, it blinked out, gone, all at once, like someone had snuffed out a flame with their bare hand. The woods fell into complete darkness. Cold rushed into the empty space where the light had been. My breath hitched. For a moment, nothing moved. Not the branches, not the fog, not even me. Then, very softly, the leaves around me rustled, a slow shiver through the trees. Not wind, not animals, just a faint reminder that something had been there, something that watched, something that waited. I stood still, listening to the quiet rustle fade back into the dark. Then I turned toward home, moving slowly through the fog as it thinned around my feet. The cold air felt different now, lighter, but not safer. The woods behind me stayed silent, empty, but I kept glancing back, searching for even the smallest flicker of pale light. Nothing returned, only the echo of those rustling leaves following me all the way to the edge of the yard. It was a quiet winter morning. Frost clung to the basement window, casting pale lines across the concrete floor. The house itself felt heavier, as though holding its breath. I went down the stairs for coffee. The cold seeped through the steps, touching my palms where I leaned on the railing. Everything smelled faintly of damp wood and dust. And then I saw it. A door. Plain. Unremarkable in shape. Except it hadn't been there yesterday. I froze. The air around it felt thicker, colder, like fog trapped inside the walls. Shadows slid beneath the door in tiny flickers, curving along the floorboards, disappearing just before they reached me. I stepped back. My chest tightened. I told myself it was the light, the angle of the morning sun. The imagination stretched thin. But curiosity pulled at me, soft and persistent. It whispered beneath my ribs, warm and insistent against the chill. I leaned closer. The door looked solid. Old wood, faintly damp, cold under my fingertips when I brushed the surface. The smell of it, earthy, deep, settled in my nose. A shift in the shadows caught my eye. Thin, crawling movements, like smoke reaching for the edges of the doorway. They pulsed lightly as if testing the air. I backed away again. Every instinct shouted to leave it alone, but the pull of the unknown stayed. A quiet hum inside my chest. I stood there for a long moment, listening. The house was silent except for the soft creak of the floor under my weight and a distant drip of water from somewhere unseen. The shadows moved again, sliding beneath the door like water pooling in cracks. I reached for the handle. Cold metal, smoother than expected. The wood pressed against my palm like it had a pulse of its own. I hesitated. The shadows twitched. Long fingers of darkness stretched into room for just a fraction of a second, then retreated under the door, leaving only the pale light behind. I gripped the handle and pulled. The door swung open silently. Nothing but darkness greeted me. Thick, soft, curling blackness that smelled of damp soil and something faintly metallic. It reached for me, a slow wave of shadow, pressing against my arms, sliding along my body like liquid cold. I froze, felt the weight of it against my chest, its pressure like a careful, invisible hand. I wanted to step back. I wanted to slam the door, but the darkness lingered hesitant, testing the edges of the room, then slipping back into the doorway, retreating slowly as though deciding I wasn't ready. The basement felt colder now. Every sound magnified. The sough from the fridge upstairs, the faint drip echoing from the pipes, the rustle of the shadows that had returned beneath the door. I stepped back from the threshold. The door remained open, but the darkness inside seemed smaller, contained, watching. The air smelled faintly of wet wood and dust again. The room felt heavier and silent, thick with anticipation. I left the basement slowly, feeling the weight of unseen eyes trailing me up the stairs. Every step pressed into the floorboards with soft creaks. The door remained behind me, dark and patient, a threshold I couldn't explain. I stood at the top of the stairs, listening, breathing. The shadows beneath the door pulsed once more. Then stillness returned. The house held its quiet, but I could feel it waiting. For me, or perhaps for something else. I didn't go back. Not yet, but I could still see it. Through the corner of my mind, a door that hadn't existed, and shadows that would not stay hidden. It was early evening, the kind of spring chill that lingers after sunset, wet grass brushing against my shoes, carrying the scent of earth and decay. I walked past my neighbor's yard. The street was quiet, too quiet. Only the distant hum of a streetlight filled the air. And then I noticed them, silhouettes, several of them, moving in a rhythm that didn't feel natural. Not like wind-blown shadows. Not like cats slipping along fences. They moved together, perfectly synchronized. A fluid, deliberate dance across the yard. Mimicking creatures I couldn't identify. Human shapes bending unnaturally. Animal-like forms stretching low to ground. Then upright again. My breath hitched. I froze in place, feeling the damp air press against my skin. The grass beneath my feet seemed suddenly heavier, holding my steps in place. The silhouettes paused. A single figure swiveled slowly toward me, its movements eerily measured. It raised an arm, or what I thought was an arm, reaching in my direction, slow, deliberate, testing the distance. I stepped back. The soles of my shoes whispered across the grass. My own heartbeat throbbed in time with the quiet pulse of the yard. The figure vanished. Just like that. Gone. The space where it had been swallowed by the shadows, as though it had never existed. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a trick of the light. Maybe my eyes stretching in the dim evening. But the other silhouettes continued, still moving in unison, still gliding across the yard, silent and deliberate. I felt their presence in the air. Cold, dense, the way fog presses against your skin. The scent of wet soil seemed stronger now, tinged with something faintly metallic. I walked forward slowly, each step measured. My hands brushed the air, reaching for a balance I couldn't find. The silhouettes mimicked my steps, matching them perfectly, even as I tried to change direction. One of them crouched low, imitating a cat or small animal, then sprang upright in a fluid motion, turning to watch me with movements that were too precise, too intentional. The yard seemed to stretch, the fence farther away than it should be. Shadows elongated along the ground, pulling at the edges of my vision. I stopped again, heart racing. The air was thick enough to taste, cold and metallic. Soft rustling came from the leaves, though the wind was still. Something moved just beyond perception. A figure approached the fence. Tall, thin, the edges of its body blurred. It reached toward me again. My instinct screamed to run, but my legs felt heavy, anchored to the damp earth. The air was thick with quiet, with a slow, patient tension. The hand, or shadow of one, slid forward. Slow, deliberate, close enough to brush my sleeve, and then vanished, gone before it made contact. The damp grass pressed against my ankles, empty now, as if the air itself had swallowed the movement. The remaining silhouettes didn't stop. They continued their synchronized rhythm, a quiet, hypnotic sway. One moment bending low, the next upright, stretching along the grass, sliding along the fence, always watching, always waiting. I took another step. The shadows mirrored it. The rustle of leaves followed me, slow, precise, echoing. Even the soft hum of distant streetlights felt too close, like they were pulsing in time with the silhouette's rhythm. I wanted to look away. I wanted to turn my back. But the pull of the movement kept my gaze fixed. The air seemed to hum softly, pressing against my ears and throat. And then, in a single heartbeat, they shifted. All of them. A single wave of motion, sliding between trees, across the yard, then paused. Silent. The yard felt emptier, the shadows shorter, but the tension lingered. The sense of being observed did not fade. It pressed against my chest, against my back, against every step I took away from the yard. I left slowly, feet wet in the grass, eyes flicking toward the yard. The silhouettes remained, still moving, still watching, always just beyond the edge of vision. The street returned to quiet. The distant hum of the lights softened. But the memory of those synchronized movements lingered in my chest, a steady, patient rhythm that would follow me home. I woke to a cold hush. Winter morning light barely filtered through the curtains. The living room smelled damp, heavy, like the air had been sitting still for hours. A layer of fog lay across the floor, thin, rolling, pressing against the furniture like it belonged there. It clung to the carpet, to the sofa, curling up the legs of the table in slow, deliberate spirals. The shadows were long, stretching along the walls, reaching for corners, edges blurred, bending around lamps and picture frames, casting shapes that didn't belong to anything I recognized. I sat up slowly. The air pressed against my chest with a weight I couldn't lift. It smelled faintly of wet ashen earth, cool against my skin, moist under my fingertips where I touched the fog. A soft rustling came from the corners. Not wind, not the house settling. Something moving just beyond perception. Slow, deliberate, brushing along the wall. I didn't move. I couldn't. Every muscle froze. Every sense tightened. The shadows shifted in time with the rustle, stretching, twisting, a dark ribbon sliding along the molding, snaking across the floor, reaching. I held my breath. The fog rose slightly around my ankles, soft and cold. It pressed at me like invisible fingers. Every sound, my own heartbeat, the soft inhale of air, echoed too loudly. One shadow separated from the wall, a slow, deliberate pull, sliding upward first, as though it remembered gravity but chose to ignore it, then across the floor. Its movement was measured, patient, knowing. The rustling in the corners paused, leaving a heavy silence. Only the soft pulse of the shadow moving toward me. Every step stretched the air, made it thick and heavy, like walking through water I couldn't see. I felt the cold closer now. It wasn't the fog. It wasn't the floor. It pressed against my skin, settled in my chest, humming faintly in my ears. I wanted to look away. I wanted to run. But the shadow held my gaze in place. Its edges flickered, slightly blurred like it couldn't quite decide how it wanted to exist. The room felt smaller. Walls bent inward. The fog thickened around my knees. I could smell damp carpet and faintly metallic air. The silence pressed against me, broken only by the soft, deliberate rustle of the shadow approaching. It didn't rush. It didn't lunge. It moved with a patience that made the second stretch impossibly long. Every inch it traveled. The floor seemed colder, the fog denser, the shadows deeper. I reached toward the sofa for balance. Fingers brushed cold fabric. The fog curled around my hand like smoke. The shadow paused, hung in the air just beyond the tip of my fingers. Watching, waiting. The rustling started again. Soft, slow, from multiple corners this time. Other shadows whispered against the edges of the room, but none moved like the one in front of me. It inched closer, a pull that didn't push, a drag that didn't touch. The air felt electric, thick enough to taste. I wanted to blink, to breathe, to leave, but my body refused. Every nerve stretched taut. Every thought narrowed to the single, horrifying focus of the shadow. It paused inches from my feet, edges blurred and solid at once. I could feel it, not through touch, but through the pressure in the room, the way the fog curled around it, the weight of the silence it carried. Then slowly, deliberately, it leaned forward, stretching toward me in a movement both fluid and impossible. Not threatening, not violent, just patient. Curious. Alive. I could do nothing but watch. Breath shallow. Heart tight. The living room held its silence. The fog coiling around my ankles. The shadow inching closer. I understood, and it had been waiting. For me. For this moment. The air trembled. The rustling softened. And the shadow hovered just beyond my reach. A dark pulse in the quiet. Stretching endlessly toward me. Morning light fell pale and thin across the living room. Winter had left the air sharp, dry against my skin, and the smell of old carpet lingered, faintly damp. I walked toward the hallway. The floorboards whispered under my weight, each step slower than it should have been. Something was off. The corners were wrong, elongated, stretched into angles that should not exist. Doors I had never seen before leaned against the walls, slightly crooked, edges dark and smooth. Shadows moved inside them, not cast by light, but by something else. Flickering shapes, bending the walls around themselves. A slow, deliberate dance between the angles. I reached for a door handle. Cold metal, damp under my fingers. The wood smelled of wet earth and something faintly metallic. I didn't open it. I couldn't. The hallway stretched farther than it should have. The ceiling rose and fell in strange waves. My feet pressed into floorboards that seemed too soft, as if the house itself were breathing beneath me. A rustle came from the corner. Not wind, not my own movement. Something shifting just out of sight. I turned, heart tightening. The shadows recoiled, then moved again, sliding along walls, over doors, curling around corners that now seemed endless. I tried to walk faster. The hallway stretched with each step, bending toward impossible angles. I felt trapped, the air pressing around my chest, cold and heavy, thick with the scent of dust and damp wood. A door appeared on the left, where there had never been one, its surface smooth, pale, almost glowing. I could hear the subtle hum of the shadows within it, the soft stir of air against the unseen shapes. I stepped closer. Every inch felt like wading through water. The The floor beneath my feet resisted. The air wrapped around my arms, pressing against my ribs. I looked down the hallway. It had shifted again. Longer now, darker. The corners twisted like coiled rope. The doors leaned further, edges blurring into the shadows themselves. A shape moved inside the farthest corner. Slow, deliberate, almost sentient. It didn't advance. It simply existed in impossible space, stretching the room with its presence. I tried to retrace my steps. The hallway shifted again. The door I had passed a moment ago was gone. Another appeared where the wall should have been solid. I breathed shallow, the air thick with tension. The walls hummed faintly, like the house was aware of my presence. The shadows moved closer, not running, not hurried, just stretching along the walls, curling around corners, testing the limits of the space. I pressed my hand against one wall. The surface shifted beneath my fingers, soft and yielding, like the house itself was alive, breathing beneath my touch. I stopped, tried to steady my pulse. The floorboards hummed faintly underfoot. Shadows twitched in the distance. Every corner twisted impossibly. A door appeared directly ahead. The air felt colder there, thicker. Something lingered beyond it, just beyond sight, waiting, patient. I didn't move toward it. Couldn't. The hallway seemed infinite now, bending and curling into itself. I felt lost in my own house. The shadows slid closer to the floor, edges flickering. Dark, smooth, deliberate. The corners themselves seemed to lean inward, watching, pressing against me. I realized the house was alive in some way. Not conscious like I am, but aware, responsive, shifting, stretching, bending to hold me in place, to make me small. I turned back the way I came. The hallway had shifted again. Another corner appeared. Another door I had never seen. The shadows flickered with every movement. I stopped in the middle of the hall. The floor pressed up beneath me. The walls pulsed lightly. I could hear the soft hum of movement from corners I hadn't noticed before. I was alone. Alone but watched. The house had become its own mind, and I was trapped inside it. Every step forward stretched the hallway farther. Every breath carried the scent of damp wood and dust. The shadows moved patiently, and I understood this house had its own rhythm, its own rules, and I was no longer in control. I remained there, hands brushing walls that shifted beneath my touch. Breath slow, heart tight. The corners twisted endlessly. Doors appeared where none should be, and the shadows moved patiently, waiting. Fog rolled in low that evening. The backyard smelled damp, heavy with wet leaves and soil. The air pressed against my skin, cold and thick. I stepped outside. Grass slick under my shoes, brushing my ankles. A faint hum of distant streetlights reached my ears, blurring against the creak of old branches above. Then I saw it, a figure, tall, thin, balanced in the crook of the old oak tree. Its limbs stretched in angles that didn't seem natural, like the branches themselves were carrying it. I froze, heart tightening. The air smelled faintly metallic. Every rustle of the leaves sounded louder, sharper, like the tree itself was warning me to leave. Its eyes, or the hollow where they should have been, followed me. Every step I took. It shifted, branch bending slightly beneath its weight. It didn't move fast. It didn't need to. The stillness carried its own weight, heavy and pressing against my chest. The fog thickened. It rolled along the ground, swallowing the roots of the tree. Softly, the branches creaked again, a slow groan, deliberate. I felt the vibration through the soles of my shoes, up my legs, into my ribs. I blinked. When my eyes opened, the figure had vanished. The air felt colder. The fog shifted like it had swallowed something alive. I stepped closer to the tree. The bark was wet under my fingers, slick and rough. I could smell the damp decay of leaves pressing against the trunk. No sign of the figure remained, but the branches still moved slightly, as though it had only just left. The backyard felt smaller. Every shadow stretched farther than it should. The fog wrapped around my ankles, slow and deliberate, curling up toward my knees. I took another step. Soft crunch of leaves underfoot. The hum of streetlights pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat out of sync with my own. Then I felt it. Presence. Watching. Waiting. Not in front, not behind, but everywhere in the fog, like the air itself was aware. I scanned the yard. Every tree seemed to shift in shape, branches bending toward me, then relaxing again. Shadows flickered across the ground. Some stretched tall, thin, impossible, like echoes of the figure that had been in the oak. I stopped near the fence. Breath shallow, chest tight. The fog drifted between the posts, and a faint rustle sounded from the far corner of the yard. The branches creaked again, louder this time. Warning or invitation? I couldn't tell. The figure's absence was louder than its presence. I imagined the thin form, limbs bending, swaying, eyes or hollows, following my movements, even in memory. A sudden shift in the fog made me flinch. The air pressed against my cheeks, damp and cold. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw it. A tall shadow slipping between the thick mist, sliding along the branches like smoke. But when I blinked again, it was gone. The yard had returned to quiet. Only the creak of the tree remained, soft, deliberate, holding the memory of the figure. The fog lay thick along the grass, edges curling, pressing toward the house. I stood still, listening to hum of the distant streetlights, the soft sigh of wind in the bare branches, the lingering cold against my skin. The backyard felt infinite and small all at once. The fog seemed to slow my thoughts, wrap them in silence, and stretch the night around me. I stepped back toward the porch. Grass slicked beneath my shoes, fog curling over my ankles. The figure was gone, but the sense of being watched lingered, pressing against my chest, tugging at the edges of my vision. I paused on the first step inside. The backyard seemed empty. Still, the branches creaked once more, softly, deliberately, as if the tree remembered, and the figure had not truly left at all. I entered the house, closed the door slowly behind me. The fog pressed against the glass, swirling with silent intent, and I knew, somewhere out there, the figure waited. Patient, tall, unblinking. The night was heavy. Cold air pressed to the cracked window, carrying the faint smell of damp earth and asphalt. I drove slowly, tires humming against the road. Fog curled low along the roadside, thick and pale in my headlights. At first, I thought it was shadows cast by trees. Then I noticed they weren't moving, not with the wind, not with the breeze. Perfectly still. Figures, tall, dark silhouettes lining the edge of the road. My headlights barely reached them, their shapes bent slightly, leaning but never falling. I blinked, slowed a little. Some vanished. Just empty fog where they had been. Further down, they appeared again, in the same positions, lined up like sentinels, watching, waiting. I tried to rationalize. Bushes, old signposts, shadows from telephone poles. But my eyes traced the shapes. Every time I slowed, they disappeared, then reformed further ahead. The road narrowed. Fog pressed closer, curling around the tires. The air smelled faintly metallic, a hum in the wires above. Low, vibrating. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, leather cold under my fingers, breath shallow. Every glance to the roadside, the figures loomed, silent, patient. A crow cawed somewhere distant, sound swallowed by the fog. I imagined movement in the corners of my eyes. Every shadow seemed alive, twisting slightly as I passed. The road stretched endlessly. White lines blurred beneath my wheels. Fog thickened. My headlights seemed to barely reach a few feet ahead. Yet the figures remained. I slowed again. The nearest shadow flickered, then vanished. Air felt colder against my skin, fog pressing lightly against the windows. I moved forward, slowly. The same silhouettes emerged further down the road, closer than before, though the distance had barely changed. I could hear the hum of the tires, the soft rush of air against the windshield, but the fog swallowed the world beyond. Only the shadows remained, lying along the roadside, silent and still. I imagined their faces, blank, no eyes, no mouth, just the presence of watching, patient and unyielding. I tried to focus on the dashboard, needle on the speedometer, hands gripping the wheel. But every glance to the side, the fog, the shadows pulled at my attention. The road curved. figures shifted with it, always at the edge, just beyond the headlights. Every time I slowed, they disappeared. Every time I moved forward, they reappeared, patient, unblinking. My chest felt tight. Breath came in shallow pulls. The fog clung to the car, coiling around mirrors and tires, swallowing the world beyond the headlights. I realized I couldn't escape them. Not by slowing, not by speeding. They moved with me, patient, silent, endless. A soft rustle, leaves or fabric, brushed the edge of hearing. I blinked. Nothing. The road stretched. The fog thickened. Figures lined the roadside. Silent, waiting. I gripped the wheel tighter. Fingers pressing into cold leather. Breath shallow. Every shadow stretched longer, as if reaching for the car for me, but never touching. I slowed again. They disappeared briefly. The fog swallowed them. Then, further down, they reformed. Patient, silent, waiting. The hum of tires, the rush of air, the cold pressing to the cracks in the window. It was all I could feel, all I could hear. I drove, alone, through fog and shadow. The figures never left. Silent, watching. Fog rolled in thick that night. It hugged the grass, curling around the porch steps. The air smelled damp heavy, with a faint tang of wet earth. I stepped outside, bare feet pressed into the cool, slick grass. Every step left a soft imprint, quickly swallowed by the mist. Shapes moved in the haze, just beyond reach. Edges blurred, indistinct. The fog swallowed them like smoke, yet I knew they were there. A faint static hummed through the air. It vibrated against my skin, mixed with the cold pressing across my shoulders. The sound wasn't loud, but it filled the space around me, layered over the soft rustle of leaves. I strained to see. Figures drifted slowly, always just outside the reach of my vision. They didn't move like people, not like animals. They flowed, bending and stretching with the fog itself. One paused, closer, a shape more defined than the others. It froze, watching, silent. I held my breath, heart tightening. The air felt thicker here, heavier against my chest. Cold seeped into my bones. The figure didn't approach further. It just stood, a shadow made solid by the fog around it. I could feel its attention, though it made no sound, gave no hint beyond the frozen stillness. The yard around me felt smaller. Every familiar object, tree, swing, fence, shifted in the haze, elongated, blurred, as if the fog itself was reshaping the space. I stepped forward, grass brushing my ankles, fog curling against my calves. The figure remained motionless, watching. The static grew slightly louder, soft hum vibrating in the air, lingering in the gaps between each footstep. Every shadow seemed to stretch. Every branch shivered slightly. I tried to focus on the porch light. Pale dim glow, yet it barely cut through the haze. Shapes flitted at its edges, slipping just beyond perception. I stopped. A cold breath seemed to press against my cheek. A shiver ran down my spine. The figure hadn't moved, yet the space around it felt alive, stretching and contracting with its presence. I could hear the leaves shifting, a faint rustle, soft, deliberate, like the ground itself was breathing. Time slowed, fog curling higher, softly wrapping around the bases of trees. The world seemed muted, hushed, every sound swallowed by the haze. The figure shifted slightly, not walking, not running. A subtle lean, just enough to remind me it was aware of me. I took a step back, foot sinking slightly in damp grass. The figure remained, silent, watching. I felt the weight of being alone, the yard no longer familiar, the fog pressing at the edges of my vision, compressing the world into this small, endless haze. A soft hum vibrated through the fog again, static lingering in the air, stretching across the yard. Shadows twisted, folding in on themselves, never settling, never leaving. The figure remained in place. Its presence was heavy, patient, as though the fog had brought it from somewhere else, and it had no intention of leaving. That I stepped toward the porch. Grass slicked beneath my feet. Breath shallow, chest tight. The figure didn't follow, didn't retreat. The fog seemed to swallow it into itself, yet its attention remained, watching, waiting. That I entered the house slowly. closed the door behind me. The backyard stretched pale and empty beyond the glass, but I could feel it still. The shape in the fog, silent and patient, waiting somewhere just beyond reach. The kitchen was quiet, night pressed against the windows, fog curling faintly along the panes. I stepped inside, cold tiles beneath my bare feet, air thick, heavy, smelling faintly of dust and damp. The lights flickered, a low hum vibrating softly in the walls. The fridge clicked on and off. Microwave blinked, paused, blinked again. Nothing made sense. Shadows twisted along the cabinets, bending, stretching unnaturally. Corners that should have been dark were alive with movement, yet nothing was there. I paused, breath caught, a hum in the air, low, almost inaudible, like the house itself was vibrating. A cabinet door rattled, just slightly, soft, deliberate. I froze. The oven clicked. The microwave buzzed. Flicker of light against the countertops. Shadows shivered with each flicker. I took a slow step forward. Tiles cold beneath my toes. Air pressing against my skin. Each flicker stretched the shadows longer, twisting them into forms I couldn't name. The faucet trembled. No water. The hum grew slightly louder. It crawled under my feet. It wrapped around the walls. I could feel in my chest. A shadow detached from the corner. Just a flicker at first. Then a form became clearer. Tall, thin, patient. I could feel its gaze without seeing eyes. Presence pressing against the dim light. My heartbeat pulsed in the silence. Each breath seemed loud, heavy, echoing off the walls. It didn't move toward me, didn't move away. It just stood, blocking the doorway, stretching slightly taller with each flicker. The fridge hummed again, a soft vibration under my hands as I rested them on the counter. The microwave blinked. The shadows on the cabinets coiled, twisting toward the figure, toward the doorway. I held my breath. Cold air brushed my cheek. The shadow seemed to pulse with the light, every flicker revealing more of it, then less. Time slowed. The hum, the flicker, the rustling shadows, all became a single rhythm. A rhythm of presence, watching, patient, unbroken. I stepped back, floor cold beneath my feet. The figure didn't retreat. It remained in the doorway, a black silhouette dissolving into the dim light, as though the kitchen itself had exhaled it. I blinked. Shadows recoiled slightly. The hum softened. Flickers became irregular. Yet the absence of its form left a weight in the room. I could feel in the corners, in the tiles beneath my toes, in the cold pressing through the walls. The kitchen felt smaller, closed in, yet I was alone. The light settled briefly, but the hum lingered, static in the air, a promise of movement. Patient, silent, waiting. I turned away, breath shallow, steps careful across the cold tiles. The doorway remained empty, but the figure had not truly left. Shadows stretched, flickers lingered. A presence folded into the dim light, still watching, still patient, waiting in the quiet hum of the kitchen. The night pressed against the windows. Fog drifted low across the street, coating the pavement in a pale, damp haze. I lingered by my window, cold glass against my fingertips, breath shallow. Across the street, a faint glow appeared. A single window, light spilling just enough to catch the edges of a form. A silhouette leaned there, still, watching. I tried to look away, tried to close the curtains, but something tugged me forward. Curiosity heavier than caution. The air smelled of wet leaves and frost. Each exhale became visible in the dim light. A soft hum hovered under quiet. I stepped outside. Sidewalk cold beneath my shoes. Fog curling around ankles, slipping into every crevice. The window stayed. The figure remained. A shadow against a faint glow. Lean, patient, almost human, yet wrong. I paused halfway across the street. Heart pounding. Static seemed to pulse from the glow. A vibration under the soles of my feet. Closer. Steps careful, measured. Fog swirling in gentle, deliberate currents. The streetlights flickered above, casting pale, uneven beams. The silhouette shifted, not fully moving, just a slight adjustment. It watched, a pressure in the chest, like something pressing softly but insistently. I stopped, Every instinct screamed to turn away. Yet I couldn't. I blinked. The street smelled faintly of smoke and wet soil. Wind rustled through the bare branches of the trees. When I opened my eyes again, the glow was empty. No shadow. No presence. Just a pale rectangle of light. Quiet and still. I swallowed hard. Air tasted metallic, thick in my mouth. A soft static hum lingered around the edges of my ears. The fog seemed closer now, thicker, wrapping around the street, clinging to the cracks between houses. I stepped back, the warmth of my own house behind me, yet the weight of eyes, real or imagined, pressed from across the street. Every flicker of light seemed to hold a question, a patient, silent inquiry. The window remained hollow, empty, yet the memory of the figure lingered, etched into the periphery of my vision, edges blurred with fog, static, and shadow. I couldn't shake the sensation, a presence hovering just beyond the clarity of night. It leaned on something invisible, watching, waiting. The street was silent now. Even the wind seemed to have paused. Yet I felt it, a breath along the spine, a weight just beyond perception. I stepped inside. Door clicked softly behind me. Fog pressed against the glass, cold and damp. The window across the street glowed faintly once more. Empty, hollow, and yet it felt alive. I turned away, heart still racing. The hum lingered, threading between the quiet of the night. Shadows stretched along the walls of my room, following the rhythm of the invisible gaze. Sleep didn't come easily. The glow, the silhouette, its silent patience, etched into the corners of my mind. Waiting. Outside, the fog moved like water. The window remained. Hollow, watching, and I could feel it still, even with my eyes closed, pressing softly against the edges of thought. The night was quiet. Thick fog clung to the pavement, weaving between the lampposts like soft, pale smoke. I walked slowly, shoes pressed against wet asphalt, breath forming tiny clouds in the cold air. The street corner appeared first as a pale blur, fog rolling over the curb, softening edges, swallowing shapes whole. Shadows gathered at the periphery, silent, still. I felt their gaze even before I saw them clearly. Each step forward made the fog shift. Whispers of air brushed against my cheeks, rustling, almost gentle, like the fog itself was alive. I paused. The shadows didn't move. They leaned just slightly, watching, patient, aware of my every motion. The streetlights flickered, casting pale, uneven beams that only made the shadows longer. They stretched toward me, then retreated with each blink. A shiver ran down my spine. The fog smelled faintly of damp leaves and cold earth. Static hummed in the distance, a thread of sound that seemed to rise from the mist itself. I moved again, feet hesitant, each step heavier than the last. The shadows mirrored me, though they were never close enough to touch. The corner stretched unnaturally. The lamppost bent slightly in the fog. Lines of the sidewalk dissolved into a haze of gray, every detail blurred. I could feel eyes from every direction, not just on the street, but in the fog itself, pressing, patient, unyielding. I slowed to a crawl, fog curling around my ankles, coiling like soft fingers. The shadows didn't follow, but they leaned toward me anyway. A sudden rustle broke the silence. Behind me, soft, too close. And yet when I turned, nothing moved. The street remained empty. The fog thickened, swallowing the shapes. Shadows pressed against the edges of perception. Watching, my breath came in shallow bursts, heart beating a quiet drum in the chest. The corner felt suspended in time, slow, deliberate, as if the world had paused to let the fog and the shadows decide. I stepped forward. Fog parted only enough to reveal more emptiness. Yet the sensation remained, that weight at my back, that presence lingering just beyond sight. The lamppost flickered again, casting pale, intermittent light. Every pause revealed more shadow at the edges, elongated, unreal. They shifted with subtle rhythm, like a slow, living pulse. I kept moving, feet pressing wet asphalt, hands brushing along my coat as if to steady myself. Every inhale thick with the scent of cold earth and mist. Every exhale pulled the fog closer, whispering against my ears. The corners seemed endless. Each step forward stretched it farther. The fog thickened, swallowing familiar shapes. I could no longer see the end. A final rustling came, closer than before, soft, deliberate, and unseen. I froze, shoulders tight, every nerve alive. The fog pressed inward, the shadows leaned, and the world remained silent. I didn't turn around. I didn't move forward either. Just stood, alone on the foggy street corner, feeling the unseen gaze, the silent patience, and the soft, restless rustling behind me. The fog held me there, suspended, waiting, and I knew it wouldn't release me until it decided I had seen enough. The night pressed against my window. Cold air seeped through the cracks, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and wet leaves. I noticed them first as dark shapes, slender and tall, stretching impossibly toward the sky. They didn't move, not in the way I expected, just existed, silent, watching. The pale light of the street lamp touched their forms, thin as reeds, bending slightly in the windless night. Shadows, but not like any I had seen before. A hum lingered beneath the silence, soft, low, vibrating through the glass and into my chest. It made the hairs on my arms rise, a quiet pressure, unyielding. I stepped closer to the window. Fog pressed against the pane, cool moisture fogging my breath. The figures remained, unblinking, impossibly still. My own reflection stared back, faint, pale, and yet less real than the shadows beyond the glass. I stepped back, heart slow, deliberate, but the air seemed heavier, thick with a presence I couldn't name. One figure leaned slightly, stretching taller, bending around the lamppost light. Its form shimmered against the fog, and I realized its shape shifted just a fraction, as if testing its boundaries. The hum grew faintly stronger. Not a sound exactly, more like the vibration of the night itself, pulsing beneath the soles of my feet. I opened the door. Cool air rushed past me, fog curling in from the yard. The figures didn't move toward me, yet they were there, looming, silent, patient. Step by step, I walked onto the lawn, grass damp beneath my feet, each blade pressing cold against my soles. The fog wrapped around me, soft, tangible, alive. And then they vanished, not abruptly, but fading slowly into the mist that swallowed the yard whole. Only the faint hum remained, a vibration that lingered, tracing along my skin through the fog, as though the shadows hadn't left at all, only receded into the corners of perception. I stood alone. The night, quiet except for the soft rustling of leaves, the occasional distant creak of a tree branch. The hum persisted faintly, reminding me that presence doesn't always require form. I breathed slowly, chest rising and falling against the damp, cold air. The fog thinned slightly, revealing empty yard and muted street lamps. And yet, when I looked back toward the house, the feeling remained. A lingering weight, an awareness that the slender shadows might still be there, just beyond the reach of vision, bending and stretching in the fog, watching quietly. I took a step back inside. Door closing behind me with a soft click. Warm air met my chilled skin. But the hum lingered, threading through the walls, threading through my own breath. The window reflected nothing now, only pale light and the faint mist outside. But I knew they had been there. They had always been there. And the hum would carry their presence long after the night passed. I touched the glass once more. Cold, still, silent. And for a moment, I could almost feel them, leaning toward me, tall, slender, vanishing, but never gone. The attic smelled of old wood and dust. A faint chill pressed against the slanted ceiling, slipping beneath the door like a living thing. I stepped carefully across the floorboards. Each creak beneath my feet echoed louder than it should, stretching into the corners where darkness pooled. A faint breath stirred the air, cold, soft, brushing my ankles and moving up my spine. Shadows flickered along the rafters. Not quite shapes, not quite absence. Something in between, bending the dim light into impossible angles. I held my breath. The air trembled with it. Whispers drifted, barely audible, as if the walls themselves were exhaling secrets. They didn't form words I could understand, only syllables curling, twisting, sliding along the beams and into the knots of the wood. I leaned closer to the far corner. The floor was colder there, darker. The shadow twisted with the movement of my own heartbeat, elongating, shrinking, never staying the same. A rustle above me. I froze. The sound was faint, deliberate, like something shifting between rafters, its presence brushing against the roof itself. I took a slow step forward. The floorboards groaned under my weight. The breath followed, circling my ankles, pressing lightly as if counting my steps. Shadows moved in the corner of my eye, flickers along the ceiling, bending with the light from a small attic bulb. They weren't connected to any object, not cast by anything solid, just moving. The whispers grew louder, humming softly in rhythm with the subtle tremor beneath my feet. I pressed my hands to the wall. Cold, moist, alive. A shape emerged from the slanted corner. Long, thin, leaning across the beams like it had grown from the wood itself. It didn't move closer, didn't retreat. It just was. The breath rose to meet me at chest height. I could feel its weight pressing in, a presence just shy of touch, and I knew I wasn't alone. I whispered to myself, but the sound didn't carry. The air seemed to swallow it immediately, folding it into the murmurs that surrounded me. A floorboard shifted behind me. I turned slowly. Nothing. Yet the shadows danced differently now, stretching toward the far rafters, as if acknowledging me, measuring me. I stepped back. The light caught a flicker along the beam, elongated. A shadow that moved in reverse of my motion, following, observing, but always just out of reach. I froze. The whispers condensed, rising from the walls in a low hum, vibrating along my arms, through my spine, into the very air I breathed. The attic felt smaller, walls pressing inward, roof bending slightly, though I knew it wasn't possible. And yet, the shadow said otherwise. I exhaled slowly. The cold breath faded. The shadows paused. The whispers thinned into nothing more than echoes. I stepped toward the door. Floorboards groaned in protest. I reached for the knob, felt its cool metal against my palm, and the attic seemed to exhale around me one final time. I left, door clicking shut behind me. The air was warmer, still dusty, but the hum lingered faintly in my ears. Later, I thought about the shadows, the breath, the walls that seemed alive. I realized they hadn't disappeared, only receded, and somewhere in the dark, above the ceiling, the whispers waited, patient, bending the silence around them, watching, always watching. The street was empty. Night had folded itself into every corner. The air smelled faintly of damp asphalt and cold metal. Street lamps flickered overhead. Static hummed through the wires. Low, constant, a vibration that pressed lightly against my chest. Shadows pulsed along the curb, stretching and contracting in rhythm with the hum. I stepped forward. They moved too, but not with me, against me, slipping backward as if the night itself was breathing. A figure appeared ahead, tall, thin, its outline sharp against the dull yellow light. It moved slowly, deliberately, always against the flow of illumination. I froze. The static thrummed stronger. My skin prickled, hair standing along the back of my neck. The figure stopped abruptly as I drew closer. The air smelled of rusting iron and wet leaves. Each step I took felt heavier, as if the ground itself resisted me. The static pulsed in time with my heartbeat. I tried to see its face. It didn't move, didn't blink. It just waited. Shadows around it stretched unnaturally, folding over themselves, shapes bending into the cracks of the street. They flickered, then dissolved back into darkness. I whispered my own name. The sound sounded wrong, swallowed almost immediately by the hum of static. The figure's stillness pressed against me, silent, unwavering, like the night had grown a consciousness. A breeze rustled through the empty alley. It carried a faint metallic tang, the smell of wires heating, of something long forgotten. The figure didn't move. It didn't breathe. I tried another step forward. The shadows recoiled slightly. The static thickened. I felt it buzzing through my chest, through my arms, as though the street itself was alive. A distant car passed. Its headlights barely cut through the haze. For a moment, the figure seemed to sway, then froze again, locked in impossible rigidity. I could hear my own breath. Quick, shallow. The street lamp above flickered again, casting the figure in pale light, then plunging it into darkness. It vanished. Yeah, I could feel the weight of its gaze pressing from where it had been. The hum softened, becoming more like whispers, indistinct, curling around the corners of my mind. I tried to follow, to find where it had gone, but the night swallowed everything beyond the street lamp. Shadows on the pavement shifted, dancing like smoke in the dim light, then stilling, holding their shapes for a breath longer than natural. I stepped back. The figure had returned, or maybe it had never left. The cold brushed my neck, and I shivered despite the still air. The static pulsed once more, then thinned to a soft, vibrating whisper. The figure lingered, an outline in the space between light and dark, then tilted slightly, as if acknowledging me, before dissolving into the empty street. I stood there alone. The hum softened further, leaving only the faint smell of ozone and wet leaves. Shadows stretched and recoiled with the last pulse of light. I turned to go. Each step back felt heavier than the last. The night had not released me, only let me retreat slowly, its static whisper lingering, curling around my thoughts, waiting. The street was silent once more, except for the hum in the wires, faint but persistent, echoing like a heartbeat I could not touch. And I knew it would be waiting, always, for the next time I passed. The house was quiet. Night had pressed its weight into every corner. The air smelled faintly of cold wood and dust. I walked slowly down the hallway. Each step echoed lightly, bouncing off walls I knew too well. But something was different. The windows, every pane reflected a shadow I didn't recognize. It lingered just behind my own, moving slightly before I moved, tilting as if it were studying me. I stopped. The wooden floor felt cool beneath my bare feet. A hum, almost imperceptible, vibrated through the walls. The shadows shifted again. It was never the same, yet always the same. I glanced behind me. Nothing. Just a familiar hallway. Empty, but the feeling remained. A presence that breathed with me, that waited with me. The kitchen window glimmered pale light from the street outside. The shadow leaned closer to glass, its form stretching impossibly long. I could see the outline of limbs I did not have, postures that felt alien and wrong. A shiver ran down my spine. The floorboards groaned softly under my weight. I tried to look away, but the reflection pulled at my eyes, dragging me closer, like water pulling at a stone. The living room windows reflected multiple shadows now. They multiplied quietly, sliding over one another, intertwining in impossible angles. Each flicker seemed to anticipate my next move. A rustle of air, cold and thin, brushed my neck. I walked past the bedroom. Its window shone faintly in the dark. The shadow there was taller, thinner, leaning slightly toward me. I held my breath. It leaned further, and then as I blinked it straightened, perfectly still. The smell of old paper and stagnant air filled the space. I could hear the faintest hum beneath it, vibrating through the floorboards. It matched the rhythm of my heart. I pressed a hand to glass. Cold, and yet I felt it respond, a pulse subtle wrong. I turned toward the staircase. The shadows in the windows shifted in unison, stretching to meet my angle. Every step upward felt heavier than the last. I tried to ignore them, tried to tell myself they were just reflections, but the anticipation in their forms, the way they tilted ever so slightly, as though they could move without moving, made me doubt everything I knew. I reached the top landing. The attic window glimmered faintly with moonlight. A single shadow lingered there, thin, elongated, its head cocked in impossible curiosity. I stopped. It froze. And then it blinked. Or I did. I wasn't sure which. The hallway behind me was still empty, silent, yet the weight of those reflections pressed forward. The air felt heavier. Every breath tasted faintly of iron and cold stone. I stepped back toward the stairs. The shadows mirrored me. Again, before I moved, I realized I could not escape their anticipation. They were folded into the glass, folded into the house itself. I paused in the dim light of the landing. The night pressed closer through the windows, and the shadows leaned in with it, silent, patient, watching. I dared to glance at each pane once more. They held me, then let me go, and yet remained, waiting behind a reflection of myself. The air settled. The hum faded to a whisper, and for a moment I thought the house had exhaled. I descended the stairs slowly, each step careful, measured, the cold floorboard beneath my feet familiar and strange. The windows reflected only the night now, and yet I knew they would watch me again tomorrow as I moved, as I breathed, as I walked to the house that had learned to anticipate me. The night was heavy. Fog rolled over the yard in thick, silent waves, pressing against the edges of the house. I stepped outside, barely feeling the grass beneath my feet. It was damp, cold, alive with the hush of something waiting. Shadows gathered just beyond the yard, leaning toward the house like they were feeling for walls. Their forms were thin, stretched, bending impossibly, but somehow cohesive. Watching, waiting, patient. The air felt thicker here, like it could swallow a breath whole. I could smell damp earth and the faint metallic tang of the night. Each inhale carried a chill that settled deep into my chest. I paused on the porch. The wooden boards creaked softly beneath my weight. I thought of turning back, but the fog held me, its fingers brushing against the doorframe, pushing gently, insistently, like it wanted me to stay. The shadows shifted as I watched. One stretched further than the rest, elongating until it seemed to blend with the fog itself. It drifted slowly toward the house, and I felt the walls shiver with its presence. Inside, the air seemed thicker, heavier. It pressed against my skin through the door, against my chest and neck. A hum ran to the floorboards, soft, persistent, vibrating in rhythm with my heartbeat. I took a careful step forward. The fog swirled around my ankles, whispering as it moved, a faint static threading to the damp silence. The shadows at the yard's edge remained still, but I could feel them stretching, leaning, anticipating. A branch tapped against a window. Or was it closer? The hum grew faintly louder, and I realized it wasn't coming from the floorboards alone. It came from the fog itself. It came from them. One shadow shifted forward, its form elongated, brushing against the edges of the porch. I could feel its presence through the walls, like cold fingers pressed softly against the inside of my ribs. It did not move quickly, but the pull was inexorable, subtle, and total. I froze, my feet rooted to the wood, my breath shallow, tasting faintly of iron and damp earth. The air seemed to hum with expectation. The fog rippled. A whisper moved through it, a current of static that felt almost alive. The shadow reached the door. It paused, elongated, leaning against a frame, stretching upward, pressing downward, a living weight without form. I could feel its intention pressing in, a silent insistence that left no room for escape. I wanted to move. I wanted to run. But the fog held me. The shadows pressed through every barrier, and something inside me understood I was not meant to leave. The yard was quiet otherwise. No sound but the static hum, the breath of fog against the house, and the soft rustle of unseen forms shifting. Time felt slowed, suspended. I could feel every moment stretching thin, each second brushing against my nerves. The shadow reached further, its shape brushing along the doorframe, not violently, not with malice, but with certainty, inevitability. I could sense it moving without moving, a presence that existed outside normal space, pressing against me, shaping the air around me. I exhaled slowly, the cold air mingling with the heavier, humid fog. My fingers brushed the doorknob. I felt the shadow pause, waiting. Its presence seeped into every corner of the porch, every plank of wood, every breath I drew. The yard beyond remained still. The fog thickened, swallowing shapes, folding shadows into itself. And the figure at the door, the one that had reached out, that had pressed its cold weight against the threshold, remained suspended, patient, impossible. I stayed frozen, listening to the hum, feeling the pressure, breathing shallow, careful breaths. The world had narrowed to this moment, this night, this silent insistence that I could not move forward and I could not retreat. Eventually, the fog seemed to settle around the yard, the shadows folding into themselves, but the weight lingered, pressing against the walls, pressing against my chest. I stepped back into the house. The door closed slowly, the cold brushing my skin, as it clicked shut. The hum faded slightly, leaving only the whisper of static and the memory of their reach. Outside, the fog remained silent, patient, and I understood, as I leaned against the warmth of the walls, that it would wait. And so would they, until the night returned.